Welcome. My name is Danielle Conway, and this is Life in the Law on the ThinkTech Live Streaming Network series. I am happy to be here today because I'm joined by William Hoshijo, who is the Executive Director of the Hawaii Civil Rights Commission, and Jelani Madaraka, who is the Lead Civil Rights Analyst for Housing and Urban Development, U.S. Federal Housing and Urban Development. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Fantastic. Well, today I wanted to get into a topic that means something for everyone in Hawaii, and that is civil rights. And many people have a very traditional notion of civil rights. I wanted to begin this discussion introducing people who are actually on the ground doing modern civil rights work that affects and impacts people in our community and beyond. So I asked Jelani and Bill to join me because I want to talk about what you do on a day-to-day basis in the civil rights arena, particularly around fair housing, immigration, language access. I want to find out about your agencies and how your agencies are helping its constituents on a day-to-day basis. So let's get started. Who are you?
Well, that's a whole lot. Let me see how we can address that. So I work with the Department of Housing and Urban Development, which is a federal agency, and we have the principal responsibility of enforcing the Fair Housing Act, which prohibits discrimination in virtually all aspects of residential real estate, all residential real estate related transactions, from rentals to buying a home to financing, anything related to residential real estate, and prohibits discrimination on the basis of the traditional areas like race, color, religion, national origin, but some of the newer, or I would say non-traditional areas like disability and familial status, or families with children under the age of 18, or the presence of families with children, and also women who are pregnant, and people filing for custody, things like that.
That's particularly impactful for Hawaii. We have families that are intergenerationally mixed. There are families who have women at the head of the families and have to rely on other family members to assist them. So this is a pretty important topic we're addressing because it's not always just those traditional classes of people.
Right, and it's interesting that you would say that because one of the current issues that the department is really taking an interest on, a lead on, has to do with pregnancy and maternal leave types of discrimination. And last year we settled a case against one of the largest mortgage companies in Hawaii. And it was a situation involving a husband and a wife that were expecting a child. They were trying to get financing to buy a home in Mililani, and they were denied because the wife was on maternity leave from work, and they said the only way we're going to make the loan, mortgage loan to you was if you either return to work early or if you get a cosigner. Like, you know, treating someone, you talk about treating someone differently, that's like when you were in college or, you know, starting out on your own and you needed a cosigner to go and rent an apartment. So we were, you know, successfully able to resolve that issue, and you know, issues like that are cutting edge. And then related to housing, even in the area of employment, you see issues revolving around pregnancy and maternity leave on a rise. So sometimes the traditional areas become the non-traditional areas, and the non-traditional areas become the traditional areas. You know, it's a lot of flux. But here in Hawaii, we see most of the challenges and problems relating to persons with disabilities, which is one of the later areas of protection, because the Civil Rights Act of 1968 didn't initially prohibit discrimination on the basis of disability or familial status, for that matter. And so when the law was changed in '88 and it added that protection, the law just kind of took off and evolved from that. But so still in Hawaii, we see that as the #1 area, and there have been a lot of changes on the state level with respect to the rights that people with disabilities have, primarily regarding their right to what we call request reasonable accommodations. You know, changes in policies, rules, and procedures that would afford them an equal opportunity to use and enjoy their housing accommodations in their housing needs. And I'm sure
So how
Bill,
did your office actually interact with Bill's office?
Well, I should say this. The Fair Housing Act is the federal statute, and there's a state statute and local statutes that prohibit discrimination in housing and residential real estate. And but the federal law requires that HUD work in partnership with agencies that enforce laws that are what we call substantially equivalent to the federal law, and the Hawaii law is substantially equivalent. So we have a cooperative agreement, and we work closely, and there are cases that are dual filed with both agencies, and we do education and outreach together, we do enforcement together.
From the outside looking in, it actually seems like the work that you do has created this bond between the organizations, particularly your office and Bill's office. Can we talk about that bond a little bit and then talk about...
Sure, and talk about it specifically. I'll let Bill address that out a little bit.
Okay, just to introduce you to the Hawaii Civil Rights Commission. We're the state agency that enforces our state civil rights laws that prohibit discrimination in employment, housing, public accommodations, and state-funded services. We've been around, I think we celebrated the 25th anniversary of the enactment of the legislation that established the HCRC. The largest number of complaints that come in our door are employment complaints, but we have a substantial number of fair housing complaints that come in the door. As like Jelani just mentioned, we do have a working relationship through this cooperative agreement between the HCRC and HUD. HUD relies on state and local agencies, and it is a cooperative relationship. So the way it works in terms of enforcement is that a complaint that's filed with either agency, the federal agency, HUD, or the state agency, the HCRC, is in the normal course dual filed if it falls under the jurisdiction of both state and federal law. So a complainant who feels they've been discriminated against in the housing context, they can come to us to file a complaint, or to HUD to file a complaint, and then they don't have to go down the street to file a second complaint to preserve their rights. Generally, if there's a state-only complaint, we would take it, and if there's a federal-only complaint, because of differences in the law, the laws are substantially equivalent, but they're not identical. So, for example, to come to us to file a complaint under state law, a person would have to file the complaint within 180 days of the act of discrimination. If it's beyond 180 days, they could still go to HUD, but we wouldn't accept state filing because of the limitation.
So speaking for myself, this is sounding a little bit complicated. So if an individual doesn't have access to an attorney, can they still find recourse in your agency or at the federal agency, and how would they be able to do that?
Yeah, definitely yes. They could call, walk in.
Excellent.
There's no charge for asking for information, for filing a complaint. You don't have to have an attorney to file a complaint. It's one important thing is that both HUD and the HCRC provide assistance for people who have limited English proficiency. So we provide interpreters without charge.
Excellent.
So in terms of accessibility, for anyone who has a complaint, they can come to either of our agencies.
And so just to address this dual filing, to make it more accessible to a layperson like me who does not interact with your office every day, the dual complaint will only be allowed when you have intersecting issues.
Well, yeah, when intersecting issues and when the law covers those issues.
Okay, when
right,
the
because
laws...
there are differences, but like Bill said, the laws are substantially equivalent, meaning that we have the same areas of protection, right? But the state has additional areas like age is protected and marital status is protected, and they have some other, you know, definitions of areas of protection that the state law, the federal law does not have. So if, say, for instance, someone wanted to file a complaint, they went out and they were trying to get a mortgage loan and they believed that they were being treated differently or given unfair terms because of their age, say, that wouldn't be covered under the federal law, so they would have to go to the Civil Rights Commission to file a complaint.
I understand.
So that would not be a dual file complaint. A dual file complaint would be in the same situation, but someone said that, oh, well, the reason why I didn't get this mortgage loan was because of my sex and my gender. That would be covered by both laws.
And you know, you brought up the example of the married couple seeking to get a loan for a home in Mililani. I think is a very good example because oftentimes it seems that people don't want to identify themselves as having been discriminated against or within a traditional class. How do we speak to those individuals to let them know that this is not something that they have to subject themselves to, but this is a right that they have to be free from this kind of discriminatory treatment? What is it that you tell people to alert them to this fact? And a lot of people don't want to be identified as, I'm different.
Yeah, well, that's a matter of choice. However, when it comes to do you want to be treated fairly and equally like everyone else, and if you believe that you are not being treated that way, and the reason why has to be because of your difference, then you have a right to do something about that. You know, rights are only as good as if they're exercised, and so what we try to tell people to encourage them to come forward is always to you know, impress upon them, you know, that this is their right that's guaranteed them, irrespective of even whether or not they're a citizen of the United States, because immigration status is not a requirement to be covered by the civil rights laws.
And that's a very important issue to understand because we have more and more immigrants coming not only to our country but to Hawaii.
Right, right. And so just by virtue of being in the United States, you're covered by these laws. But the coverage will only go as far as you exercise your rights.
So every person, regardless of status, is protected against discrimination.
In some form or some fashion. The laws cover, you know, so many different protected areas. You're bound to fit into one of them, so you shouldn't feel like, oh, you know, I'm identifying with this, and it's just something that's happened to you that you want to take action against. And then the other thing that we always try to, how we try to encourage people to come forward is by making them aware of, well, maybe you don't want to do it for yourself, but what about other people? Because if you don't address this situation, then it just still continues, you know.
So there's this understanding that not only do you have a responsibility to yourself, but you may have an equal and important responsibility to another to keep this kind of activity from happening.
And I think we see a lot of people are motivated by exactly that. They don't want other people to have the same experience or have the same, suffer the same discrimination. You know, one of the things, I think you raise a really important point in terms of how you get people to come forward to assert their rights or to make a complaint. And you know, that's actually sort of a tough nut to crack. That's what we're really, in terms of outreach, we can get the information out there. And I think when we engage in community public education and outreach, what I've seen is that I think our audiences, they tend to have a pretty high level of consciousness in terms of what's right and what's fair, and how do you translate that to having them come to our door or make that phone call. I think that's the thing that we're constantly working at.
Well, I'm Danielle Conway. This is Life in the Law. We're on the Think Tech Live streaming network series. And when we come back from our break, I want to talk about the specific outreach programs that Jelani Madaraka and Bill Hoshijo are engaged in. Thank you.
Aloha. I'm Nicole Horry for Think Tech. For nearly half a century, the Hawaii Foreign Trade Zone No. 9 has brought the benefits of the Foreign Trade Zone program to Hawaii businesses and entrepreneurs. DBET, the Department of Business, Economic Development, and Tourism, operates Hawaii's Foreign Trade Zone program to encourage international business and economic development. The Foreign Trade Zone's mission is to increase the amount of international trading activity in Hawaii, thereby providing employment opportunities for the residents of our island state. For more information, see ftz9.org. I'm Nicole Horry. Mahalo.
Welcome back. This is Danielle Conway. This is Life in the Law. We're on the Think Tech Live Network streaming series, and I'm here with William Hoshijo from the Hawaii Civil Rights Commission and Jelani Madaraka from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. We're going to be talking about programs that you are engaged in that speaks to this outreach function that you have as a responsibility. So what are some of the outreach programs that you're engaged in?
Well, I wanted to back up just
Sure.
slightly to address that because, you know, HUD is a federal agency and we fund state, local agencies, private organizations, nonprofit organizations. And so we have a whole lot of programs and activities that we fund that have to do with our mission. Mm-hmm. And our mission is to create strong, sustainable, inclusive communities and that allow for quality, affordable housing that are equal to everyone, equal to all. So that's kind of HUD's mission. And within that, we have programs that are related to community development, programs that are related to homelessness, programs that are related to assisting people that are low income, that need, you know, financial assistance in being able to rent or to own a home. And so those are kind of general HUD programs, but what overlaps all that is their civil rights
connection
or their civil rights, their rights that allow them to have access, equal access to all those programs, irrespective of their race, national origin, disability, familial status, or whatever the case may be. And so within that, each of the programs that receives federal assistance, they are required to do what we call take affirmative steps to make sure that everyone has equal access to all of these programs, right? So, and usually the way they do that is they conduct what we call an analysis of impediments to find out, okay, within your area, where are people having these challenges with respect to housing or with respect to community development? And then based upon those factors that you find, you have to come up with, you know, steps to address those.
Affirmative steps.
Affirmative steps to address those. And so every jurisdiction, every recipient of federal financial assistance throughout the state of Hawaii, the counties, on the county level, state level, city and county, they have this responsibility that HUD passes on to them.
And that's what Bill Hoshijo is doing.
Well, he has that responsibility, but it's a little different because, okay, so that's general HUD, right? And the general response, the programs, but specifically to Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity, there are two programs. One is the Fair Housing Assistance Program, where we have this cooperative relationship with the Civil Rights Commission to do enforcement, but also to do education and outreach. And also to do what we call partnership initiatives, where the Civil Rights Commission will partner with other community organizations to do education and outreach to make sure that people are aware of what their rights are, what their responsibilities are. In addition, the other major program we have is what we call the Fair Housing Initiatives Program, where we fund nonprofit organizations. And the one that's currently funded now is the Legal Aid Society of Hawaii. They have a fair housing enforcement program where they have attorneys, civil rights advocates that actually give representation to people, because neither HUD or the Civil Rights Commission, we don't represent people. We are not a neutral third party where you can come and file a complaint and go through an administrative process to have your rights enforced. But in order to have that happen, we have to have programs with people that do represent people that feel that they were victims of discrimination, and to do education and outreach to not just potential victims, but also to people in the industry.
So what are you calling
realtors.
these program initiatives or project
Well,
initiatives?
it's called, with the Legal Aid Society of Hawaii, the Fair Housing Enforcement Program, it's called a Fair Housing Initiatives Program.
Okay.
So those are the two civil rights programs we have. Fair Housing Assistance Program with the state and local agencies, Civil Rights Commission, and the Fair Housing Initiatives Program with the nonprofit organizations, Legal Aid Society of Hawaii.
So would it be fair to say, and I'm getting this conceptual image, that what you're attempting to do is to provide a web of protection, a web of rights, and a web of resources.
Absolutely.
In this area where civil rights pervades all of these
Right.
potential areas where discrimination can occur, so that you provide this residual catch-all for people, and they can find out information, they can find out about their rights from any one of these participants in this web of support.
Right, right.
And I think it's worth taking a step back and looking at the office of the HUD Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity as part of the broader HUD program to provide housing, and this idea of addressing impediments and affirmatively furthering fair housing, because I think it's important to look at it sort of holistically, because in terms of the overall mission and where we fit into it, it's that housing opportunity really is sort of a key or a linchpin to broader equal opportunity and employment in a whole range of other areas. And so the work that HUD does is, you're right, there's a whole bunch of things that all fit together.
But it seems to come together under this very important right of housing. And what is key or central about that? Making sure that people have access to housing that then assists in ensuring that other rights are being respected.
Well, you know, I think the thing, if you look back historically, that breaking down segregation and exclusion in housing it really is a key to addressing things like employment. And the thing that I really like about the way that HUD is addressing these issues is that they look not just at fair housing enforcement in a vacuum or in isolation, but the relationship to transportation and employment and a whole range of other
Education.
Right.
Yeah, it's a central theme. Where you happen to reside will also impact the level of education that you're able to obtain, the height of that education, if it's a well-funded public education resource. Are you able to actually access that resource through transportation, as you're saying? Are you able to gain access to employment opportunities because of the location to the housing?
Right. And what Bill mentioned in terms of transportation, where you live determines, what transportation you have access to. How do you get to work? How do you get to school? All these things they're interwoven in flock. And one of the ways that we do address that, as I was mentioning, is that every recipient of federal financial assistance has this responsibility to take affirmative steps to ensure that people, if they're having problems, these problems are being addressed, because we don't want to fund, communities and state and local governments where people won't have access to those programs, those activities, because they have to deal with discrimination or unequal treatment. So one of the ways that we address that is we have a coordinators network, so to speak, where each of the jurisdictions that has a person appointed, either a fair housing officer or coordinator, and we get together on a quarterly basis to discuss these issues and to address them in a global way. And it's not just the enforcement agencies or the agencies that do the actual representation, but the agencies that, like I said, that fund these programs. And so we kind of get together and we try to address it. And one of the main issues that we've have been addressing and we continue to address is education, because people need to know and be aware of what their rights are to exercise them.
Well, especially here in Hawaii, when we're talking not just about the local population, but those who are new to the population, and how they have a right, like you said, even if you are not a citizen, you have a right to access public education, and good public education. I mean, that, to me, that's the linchpin.
So you have to be aware of it, and you have to be able to comprehend that, right? You know, and so that's where the language access comes in that Bill mentioned, you mentioned. And we have funded the Legal Aid Society of Hawaii to do language access outreach to make sure that people that had a problem understanding English were aware of what their rights were and what they are, and how they can make requests for interpreters or for documents that are translated, so that they know, you know, what their rights are, what programs, what activities they qualify for.
Right.
One of the things that Bill was mentioning before we started was the fact that sometimes you find that people that have language access barriers, or people that, you know, believe that they were going to be treated differently because their national origin or their ancestry, they can be subjected to discrimination on other bases, you know, that doesn't have anything to do with their national origin or their limited language access. It could be because they're disabled or because they're families with children, you know, but how would they know that unless they were aware of that and understood that?
In the first place. And so some of these outreach programs, Bill, that you mentioned earlier can address some of these gaps in rights knowledge. So can you talk about some of those programs?
You know, starting from the broadest level, both HUD and the HCRC and these other state and local agencies and nonprofits engage in outreach and public education on fair housing. So generally, and you know, there's an annual fair housing month, fair housing education campaign that's a joint effort. But in addition to this general outreach and public education, HUD has, thankfully, they've recognized the need to serve and to have targeted outreach to underserved populations and communities. And so they've from time to time offered partnership initiative funding so that agencies like ours, state and local enforcement agencies, can partner with community partners to do outreach, targeted outreach in communities that are underserved or don't seek to enforce their rights. And so we've actually, in 2011 and 2013, been fortunate to receive HUD Partnership Initiative funding to do outreach to migrants or immigrants from the Compact of Free Association states. You know, generally people think of Micronesians and Marshallese here in Hawaii. So this is the work that we've been focusing on. It's basically an initial outreach project and a follow-up. And we've been working in partnership with the Medical Legal Partnership for Children in Hawaii, which is a program of the University of Hawaii William S. Richardson School of Law.
Thank you for the plug.
Yes. Headed by Dina Sheck, who's a Richardson alum.
Yes.
And we've basically been focusing initially on doing outreach to community outreach to COFA immigrants. And actually, it's sort of an aside, but technically, people from the Compact of Free Association states are not immigrants in the sense that they're not lawful permanent residents with green cards. They have the right to live and work in Hawaii and the United States by treaty.
Right.
But in one of the things we learned is that, that reflects what we've learned is that we've made a conscious decision in our work to refer to people in these communities as immigrants, because I think migrants kind of, people draw an inference that these are people who are coming and going without a stake in the local community, and these are residents who have a stake, and they're here.
That's such an important point to make, because narrative is everything. And narrative is everything in how not only those who come from these states see themselves, but how others perceive them.
Yes. And so, you know, the thing is that there's been a lot of anti-Micronesian, and I'll use that generically at this point, anti-Micronesian sentiment. And we hear anecdotally a lot about discrimination faced by people in these communities that reaches all the way down into the school system, with young children facing harassment.
That's right.
Bullying. And so, you know, that's why it's important that we target outreach for these communities. And what we're working on now is the gap between getting the information to the people and getting them to come to our door.
So Bill, when we come back from a break, can we pick up with this conversation?
Sure.
This is Danielle Conway, Life in the Law on the Think Tech Live network streaming series.
I'm Hong Jiang, host for Asia in Review on Tuesdays.
And I'm David Day, host for Asian Review on Thursdays. Both of us broadcast our respective shows at 4 p.m.
And my topics tend to deal with questions related to environment, culture, history, and sometimes human rights.
And my shows tend to be on international business, foreign policy, geopolitics, and national security. And you can watch our shows live on the ThinkTech website at thinktechhawaii.com.
And you can also watch us on YouTube or Olalo.
So come join us on Thursdays at 4 p.m. I'm David Day.
And on Tuesdays at 4 p.m., I'm Hong Jiang.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Welcome back. This is Danielle Conway. You are watching Life in the Law on the Think Tech Live network streaming series. I'm here with William Hoshijo from the Hawaii Civil Rights Commission and Jelani Madaraka from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. We're talking about some of the challenges that are faced by individuals who are seen, I'm just going to say it, as interlopers in our community. Let's dispel that notion and let's talk about a different narrative for these individuals.
You know, I think, oops, sorry about that.
That's okay.
My microphone popped off here. It's important to look at this, sort of historically, the relationship between these nations and the United States. And you know, there's this Compact of Free Association. The United States has certain interests in the region, defense and security, national security interests. And so there's a bargain, and you know, there's also a history of open-air atomic testing in the Marshall Islands, and so under this treaty, the U.S. continues to have certain obligations in return for access, right? And so you have people from these COFA nations coming to Hawaii and other places because of lack of health care, poor economy, other factors, and they have a right to be here.
That's right.
At the same time, with welfare reform back during the Clinton years, they have some but not all of the rights of lawful permanent residents in terms of benefits and other programs. And so the thing is that it's relatively, actually a small part of our population. It's a small number of people, although maybe larger than people might think. But as they assert and exercise their rights here, I think there's been a lot of noise, chatter about characterizing people from COFA nations as being a burden or a problem, whether it's in education, health, a number of areas. And actually, I think that filters down, so you see it in the media, you see it in, and what it translates down to is people facing discrimination because of this very public perception.
Yeah, it's a layer of a narrative, unearned, but still a narrative that is pervasive in our community. And it's interesting that in our community of Aloha, where we should be exercising open arms and a welcoming sense of inclusion, that this can still happen in this space. So this is a challenge. Are there other challenges? Is there more to this particular challenge from those who come from COFA nations? Or are there additional challenges that we need to know about to make ourselves aware of and get the right story about them?
Yeah, and I think part of that, it's sort of the other side of outreach is hearing from them, hearing from these communities and people in the community. Because we hear the stereotypes, but people are living and working. These are dynamic,
they're contributing
communities, and you know, it's so we need to have a broader dialogue. You know, at the same time, I think with language and cultural barriers, we do need to figure out how we can provide services and address and encourage full participation.
And one of these, as you've mentioned, both you, Bill, and Jelani have mentioned, is a huge barrier in communication is language. And so you do offer, free of charge, many of these services. Does the outreach, though, that you do need to cover additional corners, not just these areas where we have explicit protection either by federal law or state law? What can we do as a community to counteract the stereotype, to begin to get a better understanding of the people who live next door to us?
Well, you know, that's a college course, right? You know, but I think one of the ways that we start to address it is to kind of put it in a historical perspective, and I think I would be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that, you know, just this week we were celebrating the birthday of Dr. Martin Luther King, and I know all of you know, and many people will know that, you know, during the last years of his life, he was focused on, you know, housing discrimination and these kind of issues. So we kind of have to have some kind of historical perspective to kind of combat the attitude that people have with respect to newcomers. I mean, our resource has always been our people, has been the diversity of all the people that have come to the United States and have always come, you know, seeking opportunity. And we have to kind of not lose sight of that. That's the reason why we have these laws in place, right? Because we know that there's value in the diversity, there's value in the different populations that comprise the United States. So, you know, that's one way that I see it has to be addressed, because then you kind of break down this whole notion of, oh, you know, this is an outsider, this is an immigrant, this is a migrant. I mean, does it really make a difference when we talk about the value and what's needed for the nation, what's needed for the state, what's needed for the community? Last year or the year before, our education outreach program was kind of dedicated towards creating equal opportunity in every community. And so when you have this notion of community, you're talking about everyone who lives there, right? Regardless of where you came from or how long you've been there. And in the United States, it's always been that you are afforded some basic fundamental rights, you know? And you are afforded those rights because you, like Bill said, you're going to make a impact, or you're going to add to to the community, to the nation.
Well, when we come back, I really want to pick up this discussion. My name is Danielle Conway. The show is Life in the Law on the Think Tech Live Network streaming series.
to thank our underwriters. Hawaiian Electric Company and its affiliates Maui Electric on Maui and Hawaii Electric Light Company on Hawaii Island are deeply committed to the communities they serve. Galen Ho is a senior executive of BAE Systems, a global defense, security, and aerospace company. The High-Tech Development Corporation, the state's leading technology agency, attached to the Department of Business, Economic Development, and Tourism. Castle and Cook Hawaii, with a time-honored legacy that spans more than 160 years and revolves around its mission of investing in Hawaii, creating communities, and providing for the needs of our state. Hawaii Gas, formerly the gas company, a proponent of the Liquefied Natural Gas Initiative, helping Hawaii achieve its transition to clean energy and a better energy future. Collateral Analytics, a Hawaii-based tech company empowering the real estate industry with greater and faster access to the tools and data they need to make better informed property investment decisions. I'm Nicole Horry. Thanks so much for joining us on Think Tech. I'm Maria Kashem. See you next time.
Welcome back. This is Danielle Conway. You're watching Life in the Law on the Think Tech Live network streaming series. I'm here with Jelani Madaraka and Bill Hoshijo, and we left off talking about sort of changing people's perspectives. Bill?
And, you know, I think in terms of raising consciousness and changing attitudes, that I just wanted to add two things to what Jelani had talked about. And, you know, first, following up on the historical perspective and the importance of knowing our history. I think a lot of the anti-COFA immigrant or anti-Micronesian sentiment out there in the community these are attitudes that are being held and voiced by people who really should know better. Because other than Native Hawaiians in our community, we were all basically at some point immigrants. And these immigrants to Hawaii. And the thing is that you can look back historically, and newcomers going back to the kingdom and the plantations have always been treated with suspicion and have been scapegoated for a range of different problems. So that part isn't new, and we really should know better. The second part of this that I think is really relevant is that part of the reason that Micronesians are being scapegoated and targeted for criticism and blame from high-ranking leadership, policymakers down to the grassroots in the schools and all of that, it's tied to policy, and that stems from welfare reform. And it's because of the exclusion of COFA immigrants from benefits that other immigrants have, that there's a cost to the state, which translates into people blaming these communities and these people, our fellow
our fellow brethren.
Yes.
Yes.
For problems that are beyond their control. And so I think, you know, I know there's advocacy and really growing out of community advocacy for a change to undo some of the harm that welfare reform did to this particular community and to our state, and, you know, to in a way that's really unjust.
Exactly. And even if we reached back to the history of the word welfare, it only got this pejorative meaning after looking at the various administrations, the Johnson administration, and looking to the Clinton administration, about what poverty means and what welfare signifies in our country. And historically, welfare was meant to mean a social benefit. It's a social benefit for people who do not have what those of us who are privileged have. And on an international scale, forget community scale, this is a norm for individuals in the global community. to be at a standard where life is worth living.
Right. And I think what underpins that is the fact that we know that if people are given some basic resources and given opportunities, then they can make their special, unique contribution to the community, to the nation, to the global community. And that's what we get away from too often, and when we try to scapegoat people and like don't realize there's a reason why everyone has access to certain basic rights.
That's right. There is a reason.
Yeah.
And internationally, the reason is we want to promote peace. If everyone has a livable standard that they are achieving, the opportunity for peace is that much greater.
And where you have equal opportunity, it lifts all of us up, and there's a broad social benefit. We're all better off.
That's right. We're all better off. So let's move away from some of the challenges, because we know they are many. And let's talk, because we're approaching the end of our meeting here, let's talk about ways forward in the future, programs that may be on the horizon, or initiatives that may be on the horizon, or just talk about some of the good work, exemplars of what's actually going on with the Medical Legal Partnership, who's being serviced, and some good stories about what your work is producing.
Okay, let me, I have a little a note here I wanted to read before I forget, and then I'll kind of address that. And this is from the Secretary of the Department of Housing and Urban Development, Sean Donovan. And this is in the context of what we were just talking about, this time of year, fair housing, and what Dr. Martin Luther King meant to that. And so what my boss says is that at HUD, we will continue to fight for fair housing. We will continue to build ladders of opportunity so that all Americans, even those living in the most distressed communities, have a chance to lift themselves up. We will keep on holding financial institutions accountable to make their unjust practices a thing of the past. In total, we remain committed to doing our small part in bending the arc of the moral universe towards justice, and are proud to join all Americans in working to ensure that Dr. Martin Luther King's dream becomes a reality once and for all.
Thanks for reading that. That's fantastic. And Bill, why don't you contribute to that?
Well, I'd actually like to sort of end by talking a little bit about our partnership initiative work with the Medical Legal Partnership for Children in Hawaii, which is a Richardson School of Law program. The Medical Legal Partnership has an office at the Kokua-Kalihi Valley Medical Clinic and offices at the Kuio Park Terrace Public Housing complex. And it's really an interesting model, really the brainchild of Dina Scheck, the director of Medical Legal Partnership, where they work in close cooperation in concert with doctors. And I think the basic idea is that people may not know to go to a lawyer, but they take their children to the doctor.
Right.
So it's a point of contact. They train doctors. They do clinics at legal clinics at the medical clinic. And it's really through their connection with the communities, Micronesian communities, Kofa immigrant communities, largely in these public housing neighborhoods, that we've been able to reach out. And we, the first time around, we did a number of community outreach events with HUD and EEOC and Legal Aid as resources. We got the information out there, and now we really are on the second go-around trying to figure out how to most effectively translate information and knowledge into asserting and seeking remedies for violation of rights.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank you for first appearing on the show, but I also want to thank you for displaying the courage and commitment that it takes to continue on what is oftentimes a struggle that seems to have no end. Thank you for that, but I'm going to mimic the words and say, yes, we will meet this struggle head on and maybe rectify it once and for all. Remedy it once and for all. Thank you. You've been watching Life in the Law. I'm Danielle Conway. My guests have been William Hoshijo from the Hawaii Civil Rights Commission and Jelani Madaraka from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. You have been watching Think Tech Live Network streaming series. Thank you.